The ship was too beautiful for a war vessel. That was the first thing Ethan Cole thought when the transport docked against the hull of the Ardent Meridian. He stepped through the airlock, and the corridor opened up around him like the inside of a pearl. Curved white walls, soft blue light running along the floor, the faint smell of something floral that he could not name. His boots made hard sounds on the polished floor. Every step announced him. He did not like that. Behind him, 13 soldiers followed in 2 clean lines. They wore full dress kit, pressed uniforms, ribbons, the works. Command had insisted. Ethan wore his dress uniform too, but he had not polished his boots to a shine. They were clean. That was enough. Lieutenant Dara Novik fell into step beside him. She was 28, sharp-eyed, and had a habit of reading rooms faster than most people read words. She read this one in about 4 seconds. "Nice ship," she said quietly. "Big," Ethan said. That was the whole conversation. The Selen welcoming party waited at the end of the corridor. 6 of them, tall and still, their collarbones faintly glowing in the soft blue light. That was a Selen thing. Bioluminescence, it was called. The light under their skin moved when they felt something strongly. Right now, it was a cool, steady white. Unimpressed, Ethan figured, or just professional. He had read the briefing files on the Selen for 3 weeks before this assignment. He knew their history. An old species, proud, never lost a war in 400 years of recorded conflict. They had a saying that translated roughly to, "We do not make the same mistake twice." He had thought about that saying for a long time. The Selen officer who stepped forward to greet them was not the High Matriarch. He introduced himself as Commander Orath Kelvane, senior aide to the diplomatic delegation. His voice was low, formal, and he spoke standard with almost no accent. He gave a short welcome speech. Ethan listened without moving. Then he said, in the careful tone of someone delivering a social instruction, "The formal greeting of the Selen Concord requires the junior-ranked party to incline their head first. We ask that your delegation observe this custom during introductions." Dara, standing just behind Ethan's right shoulder, made a very small sound. Not a word. Just air. Ethan said, "Understood." He did not write it down. He was already filing it somewhere. From the upper gallery above the corridor, a figure watched. Vira Kel Selen stood with her arms folded, looking down at the humans below. She was the second daughter of the High Matriarch, 22 years old by Selen count, and she had spent the last 6 months of her life preparing briefing documents on human military behavior for the Concord's Advisory Council. She believed she knew what humans were. She looked at the man at the front of their group. Medium height, quiet face. The kind of stillness that could mean either great discipline or great emptiness. She had not yet decided which. His uniform had more ribbons and marks on it than she had expected. She read them the way she had been taught to read them. And when she was done, the numbers surprised her. She turned to her personal aide, a young Selen named Teal, who had been with her family for 12 years. "So, these are the ones who held Kara Station," she said. Teal said nothing. "I expected more," she said. Teal looked at the floor. She did not notice him do that. The formal introductions happened in a wide reception chamber, 2 levels up from the docking bay. High ceilings, a long table of pale stone. Selen officers on one side, human delegation on the other. Vira sat at the far end, slightly apart. Her role listed as Observational Diplomatic Advisor. She was there to watch and report. She was good at both. When Ethan Cole was introduced as the human delegation's senior military advisor, he stepped forward, and Vira waited. She waited for the incline of the head. It was not a test exactly. It was simply how things were done. It was courtesy. He did not incline his head. He looked directly across the table and said, "Master Sergeant Ethan Cole, 3rd Interstellar Expeditionary Corps. Glad to be aboard." Behind him, Dara closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Vira felt her jaw tighten. She looked at this flat-faced human in his unpolished boots and decided, very cleanly, what kind of man he was. Arrogant. One of those soldiers who believed that winning a battle or two earned him the right to ignore the customs of people older than his entire civilization. She had met this type before. In her experience, they were loud, short-sighted, and eventually wrong about something expensive. She wrote a short note on the slim datapad beside her hand. She underlined it. The reception moved on. Speeches were made. Schedules were confirmed. The joint operation against the Veth border situation was laid out in broad strokes. Ethan sat through all of it, without fidgeting and without speaking. When one of the Selen generals asked if the human delegation had any preliminary observations, Ethan said, "Not yet." That was it. The general looked mildly surprised. Most humans talked a great deal in rooms like this. Dara answered 3 follow-up questions with quiet competence. Ethan watched the room. He was doing something, Vira noticed. Not watching people, watching the structure. His eyes moved to the ceiling at odd intervals, then to the walls, then to the floor joints along the far edge of the room. She did not know what he was looking for. She assumed it was a habit, a nervous one. She made another note. After the session, Ethan was shown to his quarters. They were small, tucked into a section of the ship that had once been used for equipment storage. He set his pack down on the narrow bed, sat, and opened a battered field journal. The cover had been repaired with standard military tape at some point, and never replaced. He turned to a page near the front. There was a single line there, written in a steady hand, in ink that had gone slightly brown with age. He read it. He did not read it for long. He closed the journal and set it beside the pack. Then he stood up and walked back out into the corridor, because he wanted to see the rest of the ship before anyone told him he couldn't. He moved slowly, without urgency. He checked wall panels where the seams looked uneven. He pressed one palm flat against a section of hull near a ventilation shaft and held it there for a moment, feeling for something. In the upper gallery, 3 decks above, Vira stood with her arms folded and watched the feed from the corridor monitoring system. "He's mapping the ship," Teal said from behind her. "He's wandering," she said. "High Matriarch Alis will arrive in 4 days," Teal said. "Good," said Vira. "Then we can get on with the real work." Below her, Ethan Cole turned down a side corridor and disappeared from the camera's frame. The briefing chamber on the Ardent Meridian could hold 60 people comfortably. There were 22 in the room now, and it still felt full, because the Seleni officers took up space the way people do when they believe the room belongs to them. They sat straight. Their collar light was a calm gold. They had the settled look of people waiting for a meeting they had already decided the outcome of. Ethan sat along the left wall with Dara and 2 of his senior people. They had no assigned seats. No one had told them where to go. Ethan had picked a spot with a clear line to the door and a good angle on the main display screen. He had done this without thinking about it. Vira stood at the front of the room. She was good at this. Ethan could tell that in the first 30 seconds. She moved through her presentation with the ease of someone who had prepared it so thoroughly that it no longer felt like preparation. It felt like fact. 3 strategic options for handling the Veth border situation. Color-coded charts, projected fleet movements, casualty estimates. All of it clean, logical, and assembled with the kind of thoroughness that most military advisors took months to produce. She had done it in 6 days. She was also wrong about one thing. Ethan did not say so right away. He sat and listened through the full presentation. He watched the charts. He made no notes on his datapad. Dara, beside him, had already written half a page. When Vyra finished, she opened the floor for questions. 3 Selen generals asked sharp, useful things. She answered them well. The room was clearly satisfied. One of the generals made a comment that translated roughly as, "Thorough work, as expected." Vyra's collar light brightened slightly at that, a warm pale gold, and she smoothed it back to neutral with the small discipline of someone who had been taught not to show too much. Then the room looked to the human side of the table. "Master Sergeant Cole," Commander Orath said, with the polished courtesy of someone who had been trained to include people, whether or not he thought their input would matter. "Any observations from the human delegation?" Ethan looked up from the display screen. "They won't hold the line at Sector 4, he said. That was all he said. The room waited. Vyra kept her expression level. "Could you elaborate on that assessment?" He could, he did. 3 sentences. The first was about the Veth's supply line geometry, which Vyra's model had read as stable, but which Ethan said was being artificially inflated. The Veth were moving supply ships in visible patterns to make their logistics look stronger than they were. The second sentence was about a specific Veth commander, whose engagement history showed a preference for lateral pressure over direct confrontation, which meant the Sector 4 line was not where they intended to push. The third sentence pointed to a 4-week-old communications intercept that the human intelligence team had flagged, and that the Selene analysis had weighted low. He stopped there. Vyra stood very still at the front of the room. She went back through her presentation in her head, fast. She found the load-bearing assumptions in her third option, the one she had recommended, and she found the place where his 3 sentences had walked quietly through the wall of her logic and sat down on the other side of it. She said, "That intercept was considered low confidence by 3 independent Selene analysts." Ethan said, "Yes." He did not say anything else. He was not arguing. He said yes the way you say yes when a fact is a fact, and you do not need it to be louder than it is. 2 of the Selene generals were now looking at each other. Teal, who was standing against the back wall with a datapad, was looking at Ethan with an expression Vyra could not see from where she stood. The briefing ended on schedule. Vyra answered 2 more questions and closed the session. She was professional. Her collar light was neutral. She thanked the room, and they filed out in the usual order. She caught Dara in the side corridor before she reached the lift. "Lieutenant," she said, "the Kareth Station engagement file. The raw operational record, not the Concord summary version." Dara looked at her. She was a good half-head shorter than Vyra, and she had the kind of face that was easy to underestimate. Open, a little tired, unremarkable. Her eyes, though, were not unremarkable. They were the eyes of someone who had seen a specific set of things and carried them without complaint. "You want the full file," Dara said. "Yes," Vyra replied. Dara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You'll want to sit down first." Vyra said she did not need to sit down. Dara said, "Okay." She sent the file to Vyra's datapad 40 minutes later, with no message attached. Vyra read it alone in her private briefing room, with the door closed. She had a cup of cold tea on the desk that she did not drink. She read for a long time. The file was long. The official Concord summary had been 6 pages. The raw operational record was 41. The room was very quiet. She did not need the tea. She got through the first engagement breakdown at Kareth, and then she stopped and read it again from the beginning of that section. The numbers were the same the second time. She checked the source authentication twice. Every flag on it was green. She closed the datapad and sat there. She was thinking about what she had said in the upper gallery 4 days ago, when the humans first came aboard. "I expected more." Teal had said nothing. He had looked at the floor. He had known then. He had read this file, and he had stood beside her and said nothing because she was the High Matriarch's daughter, and it was not his place to correct her. And because some things, Vira understood now, with a slow, cold clarity, had to be understood from the inside. The alert came at 0340. Veth movement detected at Sector 4. Vira sat at her desk in the dark, and looked at the alert notification for a long time. Then she picked up the cold tea and drank it. It tasted like being wrong. The alarm did not sound like an alarm. It was a low resonant tone. 3 pulses, then a pause, then 3 again. A Selene boarding alert. It was designed, Ethan had been told during the ship orientation, to be calm, to avoid panic, to communicate urgency without distress. Ethan was already on his feet before the second set of pulses finished. He had slept in his clothes. He had been doing that since the first night aboard the Ardent Meridian, because the ship did not feel finished to him. The structural checks he had been doing on his own time, walking the corridors every evening, had turned up 4 sections of hull plating that sat slightly wrong against their mounting joints. Not wrong enough to flag in a standard inspection, but wrong the way a loose tooth is wrong. You feel it before you can prove it. He pulled his kit and moved. Dara was in the corridor in under 30 seconds. She had her sidearm already out, and her hair still loose around her shoulders, which meant she had been asleep. She took one look at his face. "How bad?" she said. "Sector 47, he said. "That's the soft joint. Ventilation shaft access, secondary corridor, runs right to the mid-deck hub." She had not been on his evening walks. She had trusted that if he was doing them, there was a reason. "Lead," she said. He led. The Selene emergency response teams were moving in the main corridors, organized, fast, following their protocol. Ethan watched them go, and then turned the other way, down a narrower passage that ran parallel to the main artery. Dara and 2 other humans from the detachment followed without question. The secondary corridor was dark, except for the floor strips. Ethan pressed his hand flat against the wall halfway down it, and felt it. The hull plating was warm. He looked at the seam above the ventilation shaft cover. Something was wrong with the seam. Then the cover came off the wall. It happened fast. Too fast for a drill. 4 Veth soldiers in full breach kit came through the shaft opening and hit the corridor floor running. They were compact, heavily armored, and they moved with the focused energy of people who had been given a very specific objective and a very short time to complete it. Ethan moved before he had a thought about it. He had long ago stopped thinking during the first 5 seconds of a contact. Thinking was for after. Right now, his body ran on something older and simpler and much less polite. He hit the first Veth soldier at an angle that took them both into the wall. The second one swung at him. He dropped under it. The third one he simply didn't get to in time, and Dara stepped in from the left and handled it with the clean efficiency of someone who had practiced that exact movement more times than she could count. The fourth one ran. Ethan let it run. He needed the corridor sealed, not a chase. "Novik, north end," he said. She went. He hit the emergency panel on the wall and locked the shaft access manually. Then he teed his communicator. "Cole to Selene Command. Breach sealed in 47 secondary, 4 hostiles, 1 evading north. Get your teams on the north junction. Check your mid-deck hub pressure seals right now. They hit here because it was a soft point, and if they mapped this ship the way I mapped this ship, they know every soft point." There was a pause on the other end. Then a Selene voice, tight with urgency, said, "Confirmed. Moving teams." Ethan turned. Vira was standing at the far end of the corridor. He had not known she was there. She must have followed one of the Selene response teams and taken a wrong turn, or followed the sound, or done what people who are trained to be curious do when something loud happens nearby. She was pressed against the wall in the faint light, and she was looking at the 2 Veth soldiers on the floor, and then at Ethan. And her collar light was doing something he had never seen Selene collar light do before. It was flickering, fast and pale. He had read about that in the briefing files. It meant something like, the body is processing something it was not prepared to process. He crossed to her. He checked her the way he checked everything, fast, eyes moving from head to feet, looking for damage. She was standing without difficulty. "Are you hurt?" he said. She said, "No." He nodded and turned back to the corridor. His left side was wet. He had known it for about 3 minutes already. One of the vet's soldiers had had a short blade on their kit, a backup tool, not a primary weapon, and it had found a gap under his left arm during the first exchange. Not deep, he thought, deep enough to bleed freely. Dara came back down the corridor from the north end, glanced at him, and said, "Sit." "Not done," he said. "Sit down for 60 seconds, she said, "or I'll file the incident report myself, and include the part where you bled on a diplomatic vessel's floor for 20 minutes, because you wouldn't stop moving." He sat down against the wall. She crouched beside him with the field kit, and worked quickly and without fuss. She had done this many times. The specific efficiency of her hands said so. She pressed a seal patch over the cut, and ran a quick check on the surrounding tissue, then stood up and handed him back his jacket. "Mid-depth," she said. "You'll live." "I know," he said. He stood up. Vira had not moved. She was watching him with that same flickering collar light. Slower now, more steady, but still not the smooth gold she normally wore. She had the datapad loose in her hand, forgotten, and she was looking at his side where the patch was, and then at his face, and something behind her eyes was doing very quiet and significant work. He did not ask what she was thinking. That was not his business. He keyed the communicator again. "Mid-deck hub status?" The Selene voice came back. "Seals holding. We found the second entry point you indicated. Teams are secure." "Good," Ethan said. "I want to walk the full 4-7 section before we stand down." "Understood," the voice said. He started walking. Dara fell in beside him. Vira stood alone in the faint light of the corridor, with the 2 unconscious vet soldiers on the floor, and the memory of the Kareth file sitting behind her eyes. And she thought about the word she had used in the upper gallery. Wandering. She had called it wandering. He had been mapping every soft point on this ship, so that when something like this happened, he already knew where to go. He had done it without being asked, without reporting it, without telling anyone that he was doing it, because to him it was simply what you did when you were responsible for people on a ship you did not fully know yet. She thought about 41 pages. She thought about the numbers in those pages. Her collar light settled. It went steady and low, and a color she did not have a word for. Down the corridor, she could hear Ethan Cole's boots on the floor. Steady, even. The same sound they had made the very first day, when she had looked down from the upper gallery and decided she already knew what he was. She had been wrong. She was beginning to understand exactly how wrong. High Matriarch Alis Kel Selen did not arrive with noise. Her shuttle docked at 0600, 6 hours after the breach was sealed. There was no formal announcement, no welcome party in the corridor. She walked off her shuttle with 2 personal guards and Commander Oreth, and she moved through the ship the way authority moves when it does not need to remind anyone that it exists. People simply made space for her as she passed. She was not old in any way that showed. She was tall, like all Selen, and her collar light was a deep settled amber, the color, Vira had been told as a child, of someone who has made peace with every difficult thing they have ever been required to do. Vira had always thought that was a poetic way of saying her mother was tired. She understood it differently now. Ailey reviewed the damage reports, met with Commander Orath for 40 minutes, and then sent word for Vira. Vira went to her mother's briefing room, with the specific feeling of walking towards something she could not fully name, but could not avoid. She told herself she was calm. She was not entirely calm. Her mother was standing at the far window when she entered. The Ardent Meridian had taken up a holding position near the Sector 4 boundary, while the Veth situation was assessed. And through the window, the stars were still, and the nearest one was a cold blue point of light that looked like it had been there since before anything alive had learned to look at it. Elise turned when Vyra entered. She looked at her daughter for a moment without speaking, the way she sometimes did, as if taking a quiet count of something. "Sit," she said. Vyra sat. Elise poured 2 cups of something warm and placed one in front of her daughter, and one on the far side of the table for herself. But she did not sit yet. She stood with her cup in both hands and looked out the window again. "Tell me how many of our guards survived the breach without assistance," she said. Vyra said, 3 were incapacitated. The other 4 were managing the main corridor threat. "So in the secondary corridor," Elise said, "our people were not present." "No. And the breach in the secondary corridor was the one that reached the diplomatic section." "Yes." "And who sealed it?" "Ethan Cole and his team," Vyra said. She was a diplomat's daughter, and she knew how to keep her voice level. "How did he know to go there?" Elise said. Vyra was quiet for a moment. He had been walking the ship each evening, checking the structure. He identified the weak points in the hull plating before the Veth used them. Elise turned from the window. She sat down. She set her cup on the table and folded her hands on the surface in front of her, in the way that meant, "I am not finished." "You made a remark," Elise said, "in your report this morning, about the human response methods. You used the word reckless." Vyra did not deny it. "You also wrote that a Selen officer would have managed the breach with more composure." "I wrote that a Selen officer would have followed established engagement protocols," Vyra said carefully. "Yes," Elise said, "the established engagement protocols that were designed for known threat scenarios on known vessels." She did not raise her voice. She never raised her voice. Cole was not responding to a known scenario on a known vessel. He was responding to an unknown breach in a ship he had studied on his own time, while bleeding, with a team of 14 people in a structure not built for conflict. Vyra was quiet. "How many times has Ethan Cole been in a boarding action?" Elise asked. Vyra did not answer. Elise let the silence sit. "You do not know the number," Elise said. It was not a question. "No," Vyra said. "I know it," Elise said. "I have known it for 4 years. I have read every engagement file attached to his record. There are 31 of them." She picked up her cup. In 11 of those engagements, he was operating without formal command authority, because his commanding officer was dead or incapacitated. Every time, the majority of his people came home. Vyra looked at the table. "Not all of them," Elise said. "You should understand that. Not all of them. He carries that too. But the ones who came home are alive because of the kind of decisions that do not look composed in a report." She set the cup down. "Vyra." Vyra looked up. "Show respect to him." It was not said as a suggestion. It was not framed as advice. It was the voice Elise used for the things that were finished before they were spoken, settled, quiet, and without any room inside them for negotiation. Vyra felt something tighten in her chest. She said, "I understand your instruction, but—" "There is no but," Elise said. Vyra stopped. The room was very quiet. Elise looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she said, "I want to tell you something about Kareth Station." She had read all 41 pages. "You read the operational record," Elise said. "You read the engagement data, the casualty numbers, the tactical breakdown. What you did not read is the internal advisory note attached at the end. It is not standard distribution. I requested it specifically." "What does it say?" Vyra asked. "It says that at the point when the formal evacuation order was given, Ethan Cole had already fulfilled every obligation required of him. His team was out. His orders were complete. He had done what was asked." Elise paused. There were still civilians alive in the lower levels. The Veth had cut the evac routes. Command had written those people off. The math said they were already gone. Vira waited. Ethan Cole went back in, Ailey said. Alone. For 6 hours, in a station that was structurally collapsing, with no air support, no backup, and a Veth boarding force still active inside. He brought out 22 people. She looked at her daughter. 22, one at a time, through corridors that were on fire. The window behind Ailey's held its cold blue star. He was not ordered to, Ailey said. He was not decorated for it at the time, because Command could not officially acknowledge an action that violated the evacuation order. He filed no special report. He mentioned it in exactly one line of his own debrief, and the line said, recovered additional survivors before extraction. Vira's collar light was doing the flickering thing again. She could feel it. She pressed it down. Additional survivors, Ailey said quietly. 22 people. One line. She stood. The meeting clearly was over. I have been watching humans for 11 years, Ailey said at the door. I have stood across treaty tables from their admirals and their generals and their government officials. And I have been impressed, and I have been unimpressed, and I have been many things in between. She looked at her daughter. Cole is not impressive in the way that announces itself. He is impressive in the way that is still standing after everything else has sat down. Do you understand the difference? Vira said, yes. Ailey nodded. She left. Vira sat in the briefing room for a while longer. She thought about the evening walks, the wall panels, the hand pressed flat against the hull, feeling for something wrong. She had looked down from the upper gallery at this quiet man in his unpolished boots, and she had made her assessment in less than a minute, and she had written it down and underlined it. She picked up her datapad. She looked at the note she had written on the first day. She deleted it. Then she asked Teal where Master Sergeant Cole was. Teal told her, still in the damaged corridor section, running the full structural assessment, still working. The corridor looked like something had disagreed with the wall. The breach point had been patched with emergency bonding foam, pale gray against the white of the Selene hull plating, and the floor around it still had the scorch marks from the Veth entry kit. 2 of the overhead light strips were out. The ones that still worked threw a thin yellowish light across the passage, which made it look like a different ship entirely, less like something beautiful and more like something real. Ethan was standing halfway down the corridor with a structural scanner in one hand and a ration bar in the other. He had the scanner pressed against the wall above the breach patch, reading the stress data from the bonding foam. He ate the ration bar the way a person eats when they are not thinking about eating. Mechanical, automatic, the body requesting fuel and receiving it. He heard her boots. He finished the scan reading, noted it in the log on his wrist unit, and then turned. Vira stood at the edge of the yellowish light. She was in a fresh uniform now, not the formal kind, the practical one, and her collar light was a quiet, low amber. He had learned enough by now to know that amber was usually a considered color, not hot, not cold, something in the middle that had been arrived at, deliberately. He looked at her the way he looked at everything, quickly, thoroughly, checking. Are you injured? He said. From last night? No, she said. I was not hurt. Good, he said. He turned back to the wall and ran the scanner along the secondary seam above the patch. Vira stood there. He was aware that she was still standing there. He was not a person who felt the need to fill quiet, and he had learned long ago that silence was one of the better tools a person had available. People would often say the true thing into silence when they would never say it into noise. She said, I owe you an apology. He looked over his shoulder. She was standing very straight. The way, he thought, a person stands when they are doing something that costs them something, but they have decided it is right to do it. You do not need to, he started. I called your methods reckless, she said. In my incident report, I wrote that a Selene officer would have managed the breach with more composure. He was quiet. That was wrong, she said. Not just tactically wrong, it was... She stopped. She was choosing words with care, the way she had probably been taught to choose them all her life. It was unfair. You had already done the work before the alarm sounded. You just did it without announcing it. He looked at her for a moment. He did not tell her it was fine. He did not wave it away. It had not been fine when she wrote it, and saying so now would be a kind of lie that helped nobody. He nodded. That was all. One nod. The specific kind that says, I have heard you, and I am counting it. Then she did something he had not expected. She gave the solemn formal greeting, the full version, both hands open, lowered at the sides, and a slow incline of the head, the deep one, the one the junior-ranked party gives, in the corridor, in the yellow half-light, with no audience. He watched her do it. It was not a small thing, he understood. For a high matriarch's daughter, it was probably the furthest thing from small. She was giving him a respect the Selene measured in posture, in light, in the precise angles of the body. And she was giving it not because anyone had ordered her to do it here, in this specific corridor with no witnesses, but because she had decided it was true. He returned it. He had watched the gesture enough times by now to do it properly. Head inclined, hands loose, the way it was supposed to go. She straightened. There was a beat of silence that had a different quality from the silence before. Lighter. Not resolved exactly, but honest. Can I help? She said, with the assessment. He looked at the corridor, then at her. Secondary seam along the far wall, he said. Panel starts 3 meters from the end. Run the scanner flat. Move left to right. Call out any reading above 4.2. She took the secondary scanner he held out to her and walked to the far end of the corridor. He heard the scan tool start its quiet work. He went back to his own section of wall. They worked like that for a while, the two of them moving slowly through the damaged corridor. Scanner readings called out in low voices, Ethan logging H1, Vira doing the work with the careful attention of someone who is learning the shape of a task and taking it seriously. She asked one question about how to hold the scanner against a curved panel. He told her. She did it correctly on the first try. The ship hummed around them. Somewhere above, the crew was running damage assessments of their own. Far away, at Sector 4, the Vex situation was still moving through whatever complicated political process large military problems moved through. The whole galaxy was doing its business. In this corridor, it was just the scans and the light and the quiet. Vira finished the far wall and came back to the center of the corridor, where he was logging the last set of readings. She held out the scanner. He took it without looking up. Then she said, "Were you afraid, at Kareth?" He did not answer right away. He finished the log entry. He clipped the scanner to his kit. Then he said, "Every second of it." Vira looked at him. He did not look away. He was not performing humility or performing toughness. He was just saying a true thing the way true things should be said, flat and clear and without decoration. She had expected something else. She was not sure what. Deflection maybe, modesty of the rehearsed kind, a soldier's brush-off. Instead, she got a man standing in a half-lit corridor, telling her plainly that he had been afraid the entire time. And she understood, without him having to explain it, that this was not a confession of weakness. It was the opposite. It was the answer to the question she had been asking for 2 weeks without knowing she was asking it. She did not ask what he had done with the fear. She already knew. 41 pages knew. She nodded once, the side pocket of his kit, the one below the ration bar slot, and pulled out a second one. He held it out to her without any ceremony, without meeting her eyes, without making it into a moment. She took it. It was plain and practical, and had a unit code stamped on the wrapper. It was the kind of food soldiers ate when all other options were unavailable. It was, almost certainly, the least impressive thing anyone had ever offered a high matriarch's daughter. She looked at it for a moment. Then she opened it. They stood together in the damaged corridor and ate in silence. A Selene daughter of one of the oldest ruling families in the known galaxy, and a quiet human soldier in unpolished boots who had once carried 22 people out of a burning station, one at a time, and described it in a single line. The corridor was still damaged. The ship was still in a holding pattern. The Veth were still out there. The alliance was still fragile and complicated, and full of things that would take a long time to work through. None of that was finished. But something else, something smaller and more difficult and more worth having, had started. Outside the narrow window, at the corridor's far end, the cold blue star was still in its place, still and quiet.